Breaking the walls of the nation-state through interdependent cities. How a global parliament of cities can establish a sustainable democracy. Benjamin Barber, City University of New York.
I heard about the actual fall of the wall at a conference in New York on German theatre, at which I'd been invited to consider translating the lyrics of the East German Bob Dylan, the dissident singer Wolf Biermann.
I am not going to use slides today, but I do have an advertisement, so I'll put that right here. That's the book, which contains the full version of the argument that I'm going to just introduce you to briefly this afternoon. If we want to make walls fall in the realm of politics and democracy, then the first thing we have to do is change the subject. Stop talking about Angela Merkel and start talking about Olaf Scholz, the mayor of Hamburg, or Wolfgang Schuster, who is here tonight, the former mayor of Stuttgart. Stop talking about Barack Obama and start talking about Bill Blasio, the new mayor just elected of New York City. We have to stop talking about the nation state and start talking about cities. There are two ironies when we do that we have to address in order to understand why it's so important to change the subject from states to cities. The first irony has to do with walls, because of course in the ancient world when we thought about the city, we thought about walls, the walled city. Many people don't know that the English word for town comes from Zaun, the German word for wall, the first thing you see when you approach from the distance a town in the Middle Ages, and Old English took that over and called it the town. Cities were walled, and because they were walled, and because they were contained, and because they were small, and because their virtues depended on that small, diminutive size, they soon became too small for the large scale of the populations and territories that were growing up in Europe and around the world. The nation-state was an extraordinary invention that allowed one to preserve the young democracy of the polis, the walled city, and bring it to an extended territory and bring it to a national people, a new folk, a peuple, a nation. And through representation, democracy was saved, and as a result, for the last 400 or 500 years, when we talk about politics, when we talk about democracy, when we talk about the life of a people, we have talked about nation states with all of their extraordinary virtues: popular sovereignty, constitutional government, independence. The American Declaration of Independence remains today a beacon for every nation, and new nations around the world today strive to become independent. But the irony is, the old walled city, which gave way to the new open national society and territorial state, has today become the new open interdependent city, and it is states that are confined by metaphorical walls: the wall of sovereignty, the wall of independence, the wall of territoriality. States are engaged globally in a zero-sum game. Germany gets larger. I needn't remind you, Poland gets smaller. That's a simple fact. The US gets larger. Mexico gets smaller. States with their territories abut one another, rival one another. And the irony is then that the old walled city has become the open interdependent city, where associations and trade and culture define their networking. And states have become difficult, obstreperous instruments that refuse cooperation on the new problems we face. But there's a second irony as well, and that's the irony that we live today in an interdependent world of global problems which no longer responds to the political actions of national states. Think about it. Every single problem we face, start with the obvious one, climate change. I've been often in Berlin. I've never seen a problem of Berlin warming, or German warming, or European warming. We face global warming. Most of you, not all I know, have turned off your phones and stopped accessing the www. Is that the Württemberg web? It's the World Wide Web. The technology is global. The diseases we face. When I was a boy in New York, my mother used to say, "Don't go to Brooklyn, there's a virus over there, you might get sick." Today, the viruses we face are the West Nile virus, the Hong Kong flu, Mexican pig virus, HIV, AIDS, new diseases out of the hot zones of Africa that go around the world, as the film Contagion showed us overnight. There's no such thing as an effective national public health system, even in countries that have good ones, because the global pandemics of our day are universal and ubiquitous. Terrorism is a global problem, not a national problem. The new wars are these strange asymmetrical wars, not of army against army, but of large countries like the United States and Israel trying to deal with terrorist units in an asymmetrical war where the most powerful nations find that a B-1 bomber is no match for a suicide bomber. That's the asymmetrical war of this new world. So here's the dilemma. We live in a world of global markets, global disease, global crime, global drugs, global climate, global economics, global migration, global labor. And we respond to the problems those generate with 17th century nation-state institutions defined by their independence, by their walled character. And then we wonder that we can't solve the problems. We wonder that 184 nations go to Copenhagen 5 or 6 years ago and have been going every year to a different place, and each year go home explaining why they can't do anything about the most urgent problem we face, climate change, because their sovereignty doesn't allow monitors to come into the country. So China and the United States, responsible for 40% of global emissions, do nothing, and Beijing chokes, and the American government closes, and still nothing happens on climate change. That's the second irony, the second dilemma. The new unwalled state in a global world of interdependent challenges has become paralyzed, incapable of dealing with any of the global problems we face. What do we do? Well, my solution is, let's go back to the old cities, now in their new unwalled, networked, interdependent form, and ask whether they are capable of beginning to deal with global problems. And I think there are, and I think there's some very good reasons why they are, and I'll just briefly tell you what they are. First of all, think of the distinction between the city, the town on the one hand, and the state. The state is an abstraction. You pay taxes, maybe you get conscripted. You watch from the distance the politics of states. Politics, in fact, is something we watch on television, a spectator sport, not something we do at the national level. But at the local level, politics is something we engage in. It's the neighborhood, it's the school, it's the zoning board. We have a relationship to cities. Cities are where we are born, grow up, get educated, go to school, are married, have jobs, workplaces, where we play and we pray, and we get old and we die. Cities define us. They are our Gemeinden, our Kommunen, the places that really define who we are. And more nowadays, you ask someone where they come from, they don't say Germany, they say Berlin, they say Mannheim, they say Essen, they say Detroit, they say Louisville. They talk about the towns that give them life. Moreover, and here's an extraordinary thing, for the first time in human history, more than half of the human race live in cities. Never happened before. And in our part of the world, in the Western developed world, it's about 78% of the population live in cities. We are, as Ed Glaser said, an urban species. Marx used to talk about species being But we are an urban species. Urbanization is our destiny. Some people like it, some don't, but it's simply a fact. We live in cities. They are the communities that define us. Why should they not be the communities that together solve the problems that we face as human beings? And this comes to an essential feature of cities, the difference between city politicians and national politicians. And if you think about it, you'll see there are fundamental differences. In the nation, a politician is an ideologue, a principled man or woman, standing on principle, even if government collapses, sure of what they believe in, even if it doesn't work, insisting that you vote for their party and the party program, whether or not it's effective in dealing with problems. In cities, you find an extraordinary number of independents. Even those who have been party men and women, when they move into the mayoralty, they become much less so. Olaf Scholz, who I know up in Hamburg, is the deputy leader of the SPD. But in Hamburg, he can't function that way. He can't say, I'm a labor man, screw business. Not in a city like Hamburg. And in New York, Bloomberg was certainly a very, very wealthy man, but far more than people realized, he was also a progressive. And he looked to develop schools and a public health system that would be good for all New Yorkers. Not necessarily because he had a generous heart, but because he was mayor of the city of New York, and that's what mayors have to do. There's a wonderful story about Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor for a long time in the 70s and 80s of Jerusalem. And Teddy Kollek, by the way, was by no means a non-ideological person. He was a dedicated Zionist. He didn't have much interest in Palestinians. But he was mayor of Jerusalem, which had Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It was a famous meeting because often the religious minorities and majorities came into his office to argue about access to the holy sites. And at one particular meeting where he had imams and rabbis and Christian prelates at his throat, saying, we need this, we want that. He stopped them and said, gentlemen, gentlemen, spare me your sermons, and I will fix your sewers. That's what mayors do. They have to fix the sewers. They have to pick up the garbage. They have to keep the buses running. The United States of America closed down its government through the obstreperousness and ideological rigidity of the Tea Party and the Republicans. And the odd thing was, though a lot of people suffered quietly, a lot of people didn't notice. Life went on. And if the Bundesrepublik, for whatever reason, had to close for a while, people wouldn't notice so much. But try closing Berlin. Try closing New York. No subway, no metro, no S-Bahn, no schools, no hospitals, no garbage collection. You couldn't close a city for 24 hours without having total chaos. You can't close cities because that's where the real rubber hits the road of politics. That's where the problems we face have to be solved. And that's why mayors, as politicians, are not ideologues, even if they were, but pragmatic problem solvers. Their job is to make things happen and get things done. And they find a way to do it. I was in Kansas recently. Some of you know Kansas as a great Republican state of farms and plains. What people don't know is that half of the population of Kansas lives in cities. Small cities, 25,000, 50,000, but they live in cities. And half of the 600 most important mayors of Kansas belong to no political party, although it's a Republican state. I was there talking to them. I said, why aren't you, this is a Republican state, why aren't you a Republican? They said, because it has nothing to do with being mayor of the city. Being a Republican or a Democrat doesn't work. Fiorello LaGuardia said a long time ago, there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up the garbage. You've got to pick up the garbage. So mayors have a pragmatism and a practicality, and the other thing about mayors is they are homeboys. They are people who together have figured out they're from the neighborhood. They represent us as our neighbors and communal members, not as distant ideologues. So my proposal is that let's stop talking about statesmen, about Angela Merkel, and start talking about cities and mayors as the potential governors of a networked, interdependent world. And I want to demonstrate what I mean. And I've actually been finished for 5 minutes, but I've been waiting for the gentleman to come to the stage because I want to make a point. If I was Angela Merkel, or if I was Swiss, I think, was this the Berlin bear or the bear from Bern? I guess it's a bear, and there are a lot of cities that like to have bears. But if I was either one, if I was the President of the United States, if I was David Cameron, I would take the gentleman and throw him off the stage, because that's the way states work. When they find something they don't like, they use their force, or I couldn't do it myself, but I would call in my Air Force, or perhaps a drone I would have overhead. But because I believe in cities and because I think mayors can rule the world, what I want to do is shake your hand and walk off the stage with you. Thank you.